Om Shri Krishna Parabrahmane Namaha. Today we are very fortunate to say as we are Indians because our Indian tradition and culture attain to this stage, the exalted stage, because of our Hindu traditionalism, especially in India. We can see traditional ways of life in one's lifetime because our tradition is our heart. There are so many religious traditions. Each and every religion has its own systems, customs, and traditions, and also principles. When we come to Hindu traditionalism, there are some sects like Vaishnava, Shaiva, Shakteya, etc. The people who worship Lord Vishnu is called Vaishnavite. The person who worships Lord Shiva is called Shaivite. A person who worships Shakti, goddess Shakti, is called Shakteya. Who worships Buddha, Buddhist, Jaina, Jainist. Like that, so many traditions are made our India one of the universal land, and it elaboratedly spread its tradition each and every corner of the world. When we come across through Hindu traditionalism, there are various ways of life of the humans according to their religious rites and customs. In Vaishnava, you take Pancharatra and Vaikhanasa. Pancharatra, they used to worship Lord Vishnu with the help of Vaikhanasas. Vaishnavas always follow each and every bit of the custom which heredited from their Alvars. We can say there are 12 Alvars who made Vaishnavism into limelight. 9 months they made Shaivism into limelight. But whatever the section may be, but they have their own traditions according to the scriptures. They never deviate. They always follow the steps and laws framed by our ancestors and sages and seers. That's what peculiarity we can find in Indian tradition, especially in Hindu traditionalism. Hindu traditionalism is an example for other religions, others' activities. We adopted a kind of a tradition which makes our life come into fulfill with ethical and moral values. Our people always follow a kind of laws legitimately given by the sages. Esha Pantaha Mahashaya. Whatever the path we follow, these are all prescribed by the sages. That's why we are all always feel proud to say I am an Indian. That's why I used to say in each and every episode, My motto is also we should feel always proud of an Indian. We should not degrade our customs and systems attracted to Western system. So they are coming to follow our rituals and rites. Why should we deviate? Why should we discard? That's why we have to know the traditionalism in India, especially in Hindu. That's why today I took the chapter of Hindu traditionalism. Prayer. Saguru sapita chapi samata bandhavupi saha शिक्षये चे सदा स्मर्तुं हरेर्नामैव केवलम्. Vedic and Saiva. Hinduism, in its own words, is religion thoroughly permeated by difference. At those very moments in history when the shadow of unified Hinduism can be glimpsed in the writings of pioneering intellectuals, Hindu religious communities on the earth take great pains to signal their fundamental independence from one another. Take the following word, for example, extracted from hymns of praise inscribed in 1380 BC on the walls of the Chennakesava temple, a Vaishnava center of worship in Belur, Karnataka. The one whom Shaivas worship as Shiva, Vedantins as Brahman, the Buddhist skilled in the authorities of knowledge as Buddha, the logicians as Creator, those with a mind of the Jaina teachings as Arhant, Mimamsakas as ritual, many he, Sri Keshava, always grant you the results you desire. That's the meaning of the shloka. Although we may not know its exact circumstances of composition, this verse captures a pervasive motif of Hindu religious thought. One particular god revered by a community of devotees encapsulates in his or her very being the entire scope of divinity. Perhaps composed by an individual poet as a prashasti at the command of a king or monastic preceptor. This verse has circulated widely, accruing variants here and there as a fixture of devotional liturgy across communities. Indeed, in the eyes of his 14th century Vaishnava worshippers, it is Keshava who came to subsume the deities of competing traditions, both those that we generally understood as a heterodox or Nastika Buddhists and Jains, and those we would consider Hindu or Astika, such as Shaivas or Vedantins. It argues quite simply for the supremacy of Vaishnavism and of the god Vishnu. This phenomenon is, of course, not unique to Vaishnava theology. In fact, we find its mirror image in one of the most celebrated of Shaiva hymns, which to this day remains a cornerstone of Shaiva liturgy across the subcontinent, the Shiva Mahimna Stotram. The Vedas, Sankhya, Yoga, the Pashupata doctrine, and the Vaishnava, where authorities are divided. One says this is the highest, another says that is the beneficial. Due to such variegation of the tests of men who enjoy straight or crooked paths. You alone are the destination, as the ocean is the destination of waters. That's why I used to say in Sanskrit quote. आकाशात् पतितं तोयं यथा गच्छति सागरं सर्वदेव नमस्कारः केशवं प्रति गच्छति. The water falls from the sky. Finally, wherever it falls on the ground or earth, reaches to the ocean. Similarly, whatever the religion, whatever the sect you worship, you bow, you follow, but all goes to the Lord Keshava. There won't be difference between Shiva and Keshava. Both are unique. Both are one. We people, with our ignorance, divide them, but both are one. God is one. We used to call according to our choice, but not the Supreme God into different ways. By describing Shiva alone as a destination of all religious practitioners, Shiva Mahimna elevates the deity of one sectarian tradition, that of the Shaivas, above the otherwise level playing field that encompasses all other branches of what we typically categorize within Vaidika Hinduism. The very category of Hinduism, however, when applied indiscriminately to Pushpadanta's proclamation, allows the most obvious import of the traditions mentioned by name in this verse have habitually been circumscribed within the overarching category of Hinduism on the grounds that each one of them to some degree subordinates itself to the canonical authority of an overarching Brahmanical religion. Such an argument has perhaps been phrased most eloquently by Brian K. Smith in his reflections on resemblance, ritual, and religion. Adopting the Vedas themselves as the iconic authority to which all of Hinduism must adhere, even if only in name, Smith proposes the following definition for Hinduism as a unitary religion. Having reviewed the analytical separable types of definition Indologists have constructed for the construct called Hinduism, the elementary, the confined, and the social canonical. Hinduism is a religion of those who humans create or perpetuate and transform traditions with legitimizing reference to the authority of the Veda. On the basis of this definition, one would be hard preferred to defend the case that the Saivism espoused by the Shiva Mahimna is, strictly speaking, a branch of Hinduism. To argue, as Smith does, that Hinduism consists primarily of those traditions that invoke the authority of the Vedas, suggests that individual Hindu communities or philosophical schools subordinate themselves to a set of Vaidika values, which serves as a principle for theological legitimacy, or at least seek to legitimate themselves through seeking out of a Vaidika semiotic stamp of approval. Much of what survives of early Saiva literature corroborates Pushpadanta's declaration that Shiva and Shaivism transcend the Vedas themselves rather than falling within their purview. Sociologically speaking, in fact, this is no hollow rhetorical gesture. By the middle of the first millennium of the Common Era, we would be justified in speaking of Shaivism rather than Hinduism or Brahmanism as the dominant religion of the Indian subcontinent. Such is the case that has been made of Alexis Sanderson in his recent monograph length study, The Saiva Age. He argues in essence that during the medieval period, roughly from the 5th century to the 13th century, Tantric Saiva knowledge systems replaced the Brahmanical counterparts as the primary ritual technology of ruling kings, as well as the model par excellence for religious practice, both in public temple worship and the elite soteriological paths, mean universalistic paths. Other major religious communities such as Buddhists and Pancharatrika Vaishnavas began to make bids for royal patronage through a wholesale adoption of Shaiva models of ritual and textuality, thus becoming colonized. So to speak, by the cultural idiom of Tantric Saivism, Saiva theology as a result approached the traditional knowledge systems of Vaidika Brahmanism with a thoroughgoing skepticism, either rejecting outright the validity of the Vedas or relegating Vaidika theology to the status of stepping stone for reaching the higher truths of Saivism. It is a later group of Saivas, naturally those that creatively co-opted the models of Brahmanical religious practice in service of transcendent Saiva religion, who attained the highest visibility, not to mention political clout, within the social order of medieval South Asia. In the domain of ritual in particular, Brahmanical models were often recycled wholesale, laminated with a Saiva inflection that marked them as belonging to the new universalical systems of Saivism. Shraddha rituals or oblations for the deceased ancestors, for instance, remained a standard observance for Saiva initiates, and Shaiva ascetics adopted many of the daily protocols of their Brahmanical counterparts, down to the details of prescriptions for brushing one's teeth. Likewise, in the domain of theology, Saiva devotees regularly subordinated entire Vedika philosophical traditions to their commemmoratorial agendas. One has only to consider the example of the Saiva Tattva systems, the hierarchical mapping of levels of reality, known best from the Sankhya and Yoga schools of Brahmanical theology. Saiva theologians quite simply recycle the entire paradigm of the 25 Sankhya Tattvas, adding an additional superior set of 11 Tattvas by a process of philosophical agreement. And yet, we would lose something fundamental to our knowledge of the history of South Asian religion, were we to simply reduce the early period of Saivism to a theme and variation on early Brahmanical religion. Despite their careful co-option of the classical Indic poet or Indic past, Shaiva philosophers rarely lost sight of the fundamental paradigm shift they perceived separating themselves from their Brahmanical predecessors. Our earliest adopts a remarkably uncertain stance towards Vedic revelation, paying outward respect to the institutions of Vedic learning, while elevating the Shaiva community to a hierarchical plan above the baseline of Brahmanical tradition. The essence in these early strata of Saiva textual culture, Shaivism was something fundamentally distinct from and ultimately superior to Vaidika orthodoxy. It was Shaivism that contained Vedicism within its overarching umbrella of authority, rather than Vedicism containing Shaivism as one sect within an external Hindu. Take, for example, the Siva Dharma, our earliest surviving example of Shaiva Dharma Shastra literature, while modeling its generic conventions on the classical tradition of Brahmanical Dharma Shastra. The Siva Dharma lays out a code of conduct distinctive to Shaiva initiates, taking great pains to emphasize the vast gulf separating Shaiva religious practice from analogous Vaidika observations and observances. Therefore, 100 times the merit is accrued from giving a clay vessel to Shiva. Hindu sectarianism is a form of prejudice, discrimination, or hatred arising from attaching relations of inferiority and superiority to differences between subdivisions within a group. Common examples are denominations of a religion, ethnic identity, class, or region for citizens of a state, and factions of a political movement. The ideological underpinnings of attitudes and behaviors labeled as section are extraordinarily varied. Members of religious, national, or political group may believe that their own salvation, moksha or liberation, or the success of their particular objectives requires aggressively seeking converts from other groups. Likewise, adherents of a given faction may believe that the achievement of a given faction may believe that the achievement of their own political or religious goals requires the conversion or purging of dissidents within their own sect. Shiva would be accrued from giving a gold vessel to one who has mastered the Vedas. Fire oblations, performing yajna, sacrifices. The Vedas, sacrifices, and abundant gifts to the teacher. All of these, even by the crore, are not equivalent to the worship of the Shivalinga. In the minds of its exegetes, then early Saivism condoned Vedicism while superseding its confines by orders of magnitude. It is very much the same manner. An existing Vaidika ritual technology became thoroughly subordinated to Saivism over the course of this paradigm shift that Sanderson has called the Saiva Age. Such can be observed. For example, in one of our earliest accounts of Shaiva specific ritual procedures, the installation of the linga, linga pratishtha, wherever you do, that is called the linga pratishtana vidhi. Our textual examples or exemplars for this procedure date back to the earliest surviving Shaiva Siddhanta scriptural corpus, specifically the Nishvasa Gruhya Sutra. Mean each and every part of the Saiva tradition obligates or obliges the sutras mentioned by the seers. In this context, much of the process of installing and consecrating a Shivalinga is pervaded by a self-conscious Vedicization. Specific Vedic mantras are prescribed for recitation by Rigveda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and also fourth one is called Atharva Veda priests, each of whom is conceptually equated with one of the four directions. And yet, we must not lose sight of the fact that the very goal of this procedure is, after all, the installation of Shivalinga, Linga Pratishtana Vidhi, an outline representation of the god Shiva, without whom the ritual would be meaningless. Of course, other passages adopt an even more hostile stance towards Vedicism, completely rejecting the authority of the Vedas themselves, let alone Shrauta ritual and its auxiliaries. The more ostensibly antinomian traditions inhabiting the fringes of the Shaiva cosmopolis were the particularly prone towards adopting an outwardly anti-Vedic rhetoric. Among scriptures of the Kaula tradition, the Kulasara, for example, even classifies those learned in the Vedas as Nastikas, equal to Jains and Buddhists in their traditional activities. There we can find the differentiation, this fundamental inability to grasp the true state of affairs. In other examples, in other instances, Shaiva partisans have been known to advocate the wholesale abandonment of the Vaidika cultural heritage, as said in Vedas and scriptures and Grihya Sutras. The following passage from the circa 7th century Shiva Dharmottara illustrates with characteristic vehemence just how pointed the anti-Vedic strains within the Saiva fold had become. Purana, the Mahabharata, the Veda, and great Shastras, all of these expansive tomes, meager in the Dharma, all surely waste one's life. Early Saivas, in essence, what happened? See the points. 1. Rejected the authority of Vedic scriptures. Number 2. Disregarded the social hierarchies of Varnashrama Dharma. And 3rd. Engaged in religious practice that bore minimal resemblance to Brahmanical custom. As a result, the Saivism of the Shaiva age can scarcely be described as a sect of Brahminism, nor can the Vaishnava or Buddhist communities that rapidly conformed to the fashions of the Shaiva Mantra Marga. Shaivism during this formulative period was functionally independent from any parent religion we may wish to describe as Hinduism, charting its own course in defiance of the religious norms that preceded it. Thus, Shaiva theologians hasten to justify their long standing traditions according to the standards of Vedic normativity. That is our Hindu traditionalism. Let us conclude. Shreyakantai Kalyananidhinidhidram Shri Venkatanivasaaya Srinivasaya Mangalam Mangalasha Samprayamadacharya Purogamaihi Sarvaisha Purvairacharya Sakrutaya Stu Mangalam.